Let your mind drift gently as we embark together on a peaceful journey through the endless river of human thought, flowing across millennia of wisdom, discovery, and contemplation. As you relax and settle in, picture yourself floating above the sweeping landscape of time, where countless generations have pondered life's deepest mysteries beneath the same stars that shine above us tonight. In the soft golden light of ancient times, we begin our story in the cradles of early civilization, in the fertile valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, along the life-giving banks of the Nile, and in the distant reaches of the Indus Valley. Here, as humanity's first great civilizations took root around 3000 BCE, early priests and scholars began recording their observations about the nature of existence, the movements of the heavens, and humanity's place in the cosmic order. Feel yourself transported to these ancient lands, where the warm breeze carries the subtle fragrance of temple incense, and the rhythmic chanting of priests mingles with the gentle rustling of papyrus scrolls. In Egypt, wise scribes carefully preserved their sacred knowledge in hieroglyphic texts, while in Mesopotamia, clay tablets held the precious writings of early astronomers and mathematicians who gazed up at the eternal dance of the stars. As we drift eastward, we find ourselves in ancient India, where sometime around 1500 BCE, the profound verses of the Vedas began to take shape, whispered first from teacher to student, passed down through generations like precious gems of wisdom. In these sacred texts, we find some of humanity's earliest recorded philosophical inquiries, asking questions that still echo through time. What is the nature of consciousness? What lies beyond the visible world? What is the true self? Our journey carries us to ancient China, where in the peaceful gardens and bamboo groves of the 6th century BCE, wise teachers like Confucius began developing sophisticated systems of ethical thought. Picture the sage sitting beneath a gnarled old tree, his students gathered around him as he shares insights about harmony, proper conduct, and the delicate balance between heaven and earth. Not far away, the mysterious figure of Laozi was setting down the profound wisdom of the Tao Te Ching, its verses flowing like water through the centuries. Now we turn our attention to the sun-drenched shores of ancient Greece, where around 600 BCE, in the bustling port city of Miletus, Thales became what many consider the first true philosopher of the Western tradition. Imagine walking through the marble-columned agora, where citizens gather to discuss ideas in the cool shade of olive trees. Here, Thales and his successors began asking fundamental questions about the natural world, seeking rational explanations rather than mythological ones. As the warm Mediterranean breezes carry us forward through time, we encounter the towering figure of Socrates in 5th century BCE Athens. Picture the wise teacher walking through the city's narrow streets, engaging citizens in his famous method of questioning, helping them examine their deepest assumptions about justice, courage, and the good life. Though he never wrote anything down, his student Plato would preserve his teachings and build upon them to create one of the most influential philosophical systems in human history. In Plato's Academy, founded around 387 BCE, we can almost hear the passionate discussions about the nature of reality, knowledge, and justice echoing across the centuries. Here, among the olive groves and colonnades, Plato developed his theory of forms, the idea that beyond our world of changing appearances lies a realm of perfect, eternal ideas. His student Aristotle would later establish his own school, the Lyceum, where he developed a more empirical approach to understanding the world, creating systematic studies of logic, physics, biology, and metaphysics that would influence thought for over 2 millennia. As the classical age gradually gives way to the Hellenistic period, we see new schools of philosophy emerging in the agoras and gardens of Athens. The Stoics, founded by Zeno of Citium around 300 BCE, taught that true happiness comes from accepting what is beyond our control and living in harmony with nature's laws. The Epicureans, following the teachings of Epicurus, sought tranquility through simple pleasures and freedom from unnecessary fears. The skeptics, led by Pyrrho, questioned whether certain knowledge was possible at all. As we float forward through time, we watch the gradual spread of these ideas throughout the vast Roman Empire, where thinkers like Cicero, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius adapted Greek philosophy to Roman sensibilities. In the quiet evening hours, picture the Emperor Marcus Aurelius writing his Meditations by lamplight in his military tent, reflecting on duty, mortality, and the nature of the good life. Meanwhile, in Alexandria, that great meeting point of cultures, Neoplatonist philosophers like Plotinus were developing mystical interpretations of Plato's ideas, building bridges between Greek rationalism and religious spirituality. As the Roman Empire slowly transformed, these ideas would influence the development of both Christian and Islamic philosophy in the centuries to come. As the classical world gradually fades into the medieval period, we see the preservation and transmission of ancient wisdom through the dedicated work of Muslim scholars. In the great libraries of Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba, philosophers like Al-Farabi, Avicenna, and Averroes carefully translated and commented on Greek texts, adding their own profound insights about logic, metaphysics, and the relationship between faith and reason. In the Christian West, monasteries became the primary centers of learning during the early Middle Ages. Picture the quiet scriptoria where monks painstakingly copied ancient manuscripts by candlelight, preserving classical knowledge through the centuries. As cathedral schools and universities began to emerge in the 12th and 13th centuries, scholars like Peter Abelard, Albertus Magnus, and Thomas Aquinas worked to reconcile classical philosophy with Christian theology, creating the great synthesis of medieval scholasticism. As we drift into the Renaissance, we feel the excitement of rediscovery as scholars like Marsilio Ficino translate newly recovered ancient texts, helping to spark a revival of classical learning. The printing press spreads these ideas far and wide, and new ways of thinking begin to emerge. In quiet studies across Europe, philosophers like Michel de Montaigne write personal essays exploring human nature and the limits of knowledge, while scientists like Galileo challenge traditional authorities with careful observations of the natural world. The 17th century brings us into the modern era, where thinkers like Francis Bacon and René Descartes lay the foundations for new approaches to knowledge and scientific method. In his quiet meditation room, Descartes questions everything he thinks he knows, eventually arriving at his famous, "I think, therefore I am." This period sees the emergence of rationalism through philosophers like Spinoza and Leibniz, who believe that reason alone can reveal the deepest truths about reality. In England, empiricists like John Locke, George Berkeley, and David Hume argue instead that all knowledge must ultimately come from sensory experience. Picture Hume walking through the misty streets of Edinburgh, carefully analyzing human nature and questioning our assumptions about causation and the self. These debates about the nature and limits of human knowledge continue to resonate through philosophy today. The 18th century brings us to the Enlightenment, where philosophers like Voltaire, Diderot, and Rousseau challenge traditional authorities and argue for human reason and natural rights. In his study in Königsberg, Immanuel Kant works to reconcile rationalism and empiricism, creating a revolutionary new approach to understanding how we experience and know the world. His influence would be felt throughout all subsequent philosophy. As we enter the 19th century, we encounter the systematic idealism of Hegel, who sees all of history as the progressive unfolding of spirit or mind. His influence spawns numerous reactions and developments, from the materialist analysis of Marx to the psychological insights of Kierkegaard and the life-affirming philosophy of Nietzsche. Each of these thinkers brings new perspectives on human nature, society, and the meaning of existence. The 20th century opens new chapters in philosophical thought, as thinkers respond to unprecedented social changes and scientific discoveries. Early in the century, Edmund Husserl develops phenomenology, a careful method for examining conscious experience, while Ludwig Wittgenstein revolutionizes our understanding of language and meaning. Existentialist philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus grapple with questions of freedom and meaning in an apparently meaningless universe. As we approach our own time, we see philosophy branching into numerous specialized fields, engaging with questions in science, politics, ethics, and technology. Contemporary philosophers continue to build on this rich heritage while addressing new challenges posed by artificial intelligence, environmental crisis, and rapid social change. As our journey through the history of philosophy draws to a close, we can feel the weight of centuries of human wisdom settling gently around us. From the ancient sages of India and China to the classical philosophers of Greece and Rome, from medieval scholars to modern thinkers, we have traced the eternal human quest to understand ourselves and our place in the cosmos. As you rest and reflect on this vast tapestry of ideas, remember that you too are part of this ongoing conversation, this endless search for wisdom that has occupied the greatest minds throughout history. Let these thoughts drift peacefully through your mind as you prepare to explore the specific ideas and thinkers who have shaped our intellectual heritage in greater detail. Let us drift back through time to the very origins of philosophical thought, when humans first began to contemplate the deeper questions of existence. As you rest and listen, imagine the warm Mediterranean sun casting long shadows across ancient stone buildings, while early thinkers gathered to discuss the nature of reality itself. Our journey begins in the cradle of Western philosophy, ancient Greece, though we must acknowledge that philosophical thinking emerged independently in many cultures across the world. The gentle waves of the Aegean Sea lap against the shores of Miletus, where in the 6th century BCE, Thales would gaze up at the stars and propose that water was the fundamental substance of all things. The air is filled with the scent of olive groves and the distant sounds of merchants in the Agora, as we explore how these early thinkers began to move away from mythological explanations toward rational inquiry. Thales and his successors, known as the Milesian school, sought natural explanations for phenomena rather than attributing events to the whims of gods. Imagine walking through the bustling streets of Miletus, hearing the discussions in the marketplace as Anaximander proposed that the world emerged from the apeiron, the boundless, infinite substance. The soft Mediterranean breeze carries the voices of debate as Anaximenes suggests that air, through processes of rarefaction and condensation, forms all other substances. As we move forward in time, we find ourselves in the Greek colony of Croton in southern Italy, where Pythagoras established his famous school around 530 BCE. The air is filled with the sound of mathematical discussions and musical harmonies, as his followers discover the mathematical relationships underlying musical notes. The Pythagoreans lived in a communal setting, sharing their discoveries and believing that reality could be understood through numbers and mathematical relationships. Let us pause and consider how these ideas spread through the ancient world. Merchants and travelers carried philosophical concepts along trade routes, just as they transported olive oil, wine, and precious metals. The sounds of multiple languages blend together in busy ports, where Greek meets Persian meets Egyptian, and ideas flow as freely as goods. In the Greek colony of Ephesus, we encounter Heraclitus, who taught that change was the fundamental nature of reality. No one steps in the same river twice, he observed, watching the flowing waters of the Cayster River. The marketplace bustles with activity as his followers contemplate the eternal flux of existence, while the aroma of roasting meat and fresh bread wafts through the air. Moving to Elea, another Greek colony in southern Italy, we find Parmenides presenting a strikingly different view. In the cool shade of olive trees, he argues that change is impossible and that reality is a single, unchanging whole. His student Zeno develops famous paradoxes that still puzzle philosophers today, as the sound of waves provides a rhythmic backdrop to their logical discussions. The intellectual climate of the 5th century BCE brings us to Athens, where philosophy would flourish as never before. The city is alive with the sound of construction as the Parthenon rises on the Acropolis, while in the streets below, the sophists begin teaching rhetoric and questioning traditional values. The air is thick with the scent of incense from temples and the sounds of democratic debate in the assembly. Imagine walking through the Athenian agora, where Socrates engages citizens in his famous method of questioning. The morning sun illuminates the stoas and temples as he challenges young and old alike to examine their beliefs and seek true wisdom. His student Plato would later establish the academy, where philosophers would study for nearly 9 centuries. In the quiet corners of the academy's gardens, Plato develops his theory of forms, suggesting that the physical world is but a shadow of perfect, eternal ideas. The olive trees rustle in the breeze as students discuss justice, beauty, and the nature of the good life. The scent of flowers mingles with the sound of thoughtful conversation as young minds grapple with abstract concepts. Let us consider how philosophy touched the lives of ordinary people in these ancient times. While most could not attend formal schools of philosophy, ideas filtered through society in public discussions, religious festivals, and dramatic performances. The questions raised by philosophers resonated with fundamental human concerns about justice, truth, and the meaning of life. As we move into the 4th century BCE, we find ourselves in the Lyceum, where Aristotle established his own school. The morning air is cool as students gather to hear his lectures on logic, physics, metaphysics, and ethics. Birds sing in the surrounding grove as he develops his systematic approach to knowledge, categorizing and analyzing everything from the movement of the stars to the nature of happiness. The spread of Greek culture through Alexander the Great's conquests creates new centers of philosophical activity. In Alexandria, the Great Library becomes a beacon of learning, where scholars from different traditions meet and share ideas. The sound of waves mingles with the scratching of reed pens as scribes copy philosophical texts, preserving them for future generations. In the Hellenistic period, new schools of philosophy emerge to address the challenges of a changing world. The Epicureans seek happiness through simple pleasures and freedom from fear, while the Stoics teach that virtue alone is sufficient for happiness. In gardens and porticos throughout the Mediterranean world, philosophers debate the best way to live. The Roman conquest of Greece marks not an end, but a transformation of philosophical activity. Roman thinkers like Cicero and Seneca adapt Greek philosophy to Roman concerns, focusing on practical ethics and political philosophy. The sounds of Latin now mix with Greek in philosophical discussions, as Roman aristocrats embrace Greek learning. Meanwhile, in other parts of the world, different philosophical traditions are developing. In India, the Upanishads explore questions of consciousness and reality, while Buddhist philosophers analyze the nature of mind and existence. Chinese philosophers of the Hundred Schools period debate proper governance and the nature of the good life, as the sounds of court music drift through imperial gardens. Let us pause to consider how these various traditions sometimes intersected. Along the Silk Road, ideas traveled with goods, creating fascinating syntheses of thought. In cities like Taxila and Chang'an, philosophers from different traditions could sometimes meet and exchange ideas, their discussions echoing through torchlit halls. As we return to the Mediterranean world, we find philosophy increasingly intertwining with religious thought. Jewish philosophers in Alexandria, like Philo, begin combining Greek philosophical methods with biblical interpretation. The air is filled with the sound of prayers and philosophical debates as new syntheses of thought emerge. The early Christian period sees philosophers grappling with questions of faith and reason. In the streets of Athens and Alexandria, Neoplatonist philosophers like Plotinus develop complex metaphysical systems that would influence both Christian and Islamic thought. The sound of church bells begins to mix with the calls to philosophical discourse. As the Roman Empire transforms in late antiquity, philosophy adapts to new circumstances. In Constantinople, philosophers preserve and comment on ancient texts, while in monasteries across Europe, monks copy philosophical manuscripts by candlelight. The scratch of quills on parchment ensures the survival of ancient wisdom through the coming centuries. This early period of philosophical development sets the stage for all that would follow. The questions raised by these ancient thinkers continue to resonate. What is the nature of reality? How can we know what is true? What makes a life worth living? The gentle sounds of their discussions echo through time, reaching us even today. As we conclude this exploration of philosophy's origins and early development, we can reflect on how these ancient thinkers laid the groundwork for all subsequent philosophical inquiry. Their methods of rational investigation, their careful arguments, and their profound questions would shape the course of human thought for millennia to come. The sun sets over the Mediterranean as we prepare to move forward in our journey through philosophical history. The questions raised in these ancient times would find new expression in the medieval period, as different cultural traditions encountered and enriched each other. But for now, let us rest in the peaceful knowledge that human beings have long sought wisdom and understanding, their questions echoing across the centuries to touch our own lives today. As we continue our peaceful journey through the development of philosophical thought, we find ourselves entering an age of remarkable intellectual transformation and the rise of systematic philosophical inquiry. Picture yourself walking through the sun-dappled streets of ancient Athens in the 5th century BCE, where the gentle Mediterranean breeze carries the distant sounds of marketplace debates and scholarly discussions. In this pivotal period, philosophy began to emerge from its mythological origins into more structured forms of reasoning and investigation. The Greek city-states, particularly Athens, provided fertile ground for this intellectual flowering. Imagine the daily life of citizens gathering in the agora, where merchants sold their wares while nearby, beneath covered walkways called stoas, philosophers engaged in deep discussions about the nature of reality, justice, and knowledge. The pre-Socratic philosophers laid important groundwork during this time. Thales of Miletus, often considered the first Western philosopher, proposed that water was the fundamental substance of all things. His student Anaximander suggested instead an indefinite substance called the apeiron. These early thinkers were looking beyond traditional mythological explanations to find natural principles underlying the world around them. In the quiet corners of various Greek cities, different schools of thought began to develop. Heraclitus of Ephesus, observing the flowing waters of rivers, conceived of reality as being in constant flux, famously stating that one could never step into the same river twice. Meanwhile, Parmenides of Elea argued for the exact opposite, that true reality was unchanging and that motion was an illusion. The Pythagoreans, following their enigmatic leader Pythagoras, established communities where mathematics, music, and philosophy intertwined. They discovered mathematical relationships in musical harmonies and believed numbers were the key to understanding reality. Their influence would echo through centuries of philosophical and scientific thought. As trade routes connected different regions of the ancient world, philosophical ideas began to cross-pollinate. Persian thought influenced Greek philosophy, while Egyptian wisdom contributed to the growing body of knowledge. The port cities became centers of intellectual exchange, where different traditions and perspectives could mingle and merge. The sophists emerged as traveling teachers, bringing new ideas about rhetoric, knowledge, and education to the Greek cities. Protagoras, perhaps the most famous sophist, taught that man is the measure of all things, introducing a form of relativism that would spark centuries of debate about the nature of truth and knowledge. In this rich intellectual environment, Socrates began his philosophical investigations. Walking through the streets of Athens, engaging citizens in dialogue, he developed his method of questioning assumptions and seeking clear definitions. Though he wrote nothing himself, his impact would be immense, preserved through the writings of his student Plato. Plato's Academy, established in a quiet grove outside Athens around 387 BCE, became the first institution dedicated to philosophical study. Here, students would gather to discuss mathematics, politics, ethics, and metaphysics. The Academy's influence would extend far beyond Athens, attracting students from across the Mediterranean world. The political context of this period was crucial to philosophical development. The Greek city-states experimented with different forms of government, from democracy to oligarchy to tyranny. These political changes provided philosophers with real-world laboratories for testing ideas about justice, leadership, and the good life. In this environment, Plato developed his theory of forms, suggesting that the physical world we experience is merely a shadow of perfect, eternal ideas. His Republic, written as a dialogue, explored the nature of justice and proposed a vision of the ideal state led by philosopher kings. Aristotle, who studied at Plato's Academy for 20 years, would later establish his own school, the Lyceum. His systematic approach to knowledge covered everything from logic and metaphysics to biology and poetry. Aristotle's influence would extend far beyond Greece, shaping philosophical thought in the Islamic world and medieval Europe. The rise of Macedonian power under Philip II and Alexander the Great brought significant changes to the Greek world. As Alexander's empire expanded, Greek philosophical ideas spread across the known world, reaching as far as India. This cultural exchange would enrich philosophical thought with new perspectives and questions. In the Hellenistic period that followed Alexander's death, new philosophical schools emerged. The Stoics, founded by Zeno of Citium, taught that happiness could be found through accepting one's fate and living according to reason. The Epicureans, following Epicurus, sought tranquility through moderate pleasure and freedom from fear. These schools established communities where students could live and study together, creating spaces for contemplation and discussion. The gardens of Epicurus became famous as places of philosophical retreat, where followers could distance themselves from the political turbulence of the time. The role of women in philosophy, though often overlooked by historical records, was not insignificant. Aspasia of Miletus was known for her intellectual gatherings, while Hipparchia joined the Cynic school, challenging social conventions. Their contributions remind us that philosophical inquiry crossed gender boundaries, even in ancient times. As Greek philosophy spread, it encountered and influenced other intellectual traditions. In Alexandria, Greek philosophy merged with Egyptian and Jewish thought, creating new synthetic approaches. The Library of Alexandria became a center for scholarly study, where different philosophical traditions could be preserved and studied together. The economic prosperity of the Hellenistic period supported philosophical activity through patronage and the establishment of schools. Cities competed to attract philosophers and scholars, recognizing the prestige and practical benefits of philosophical education. The development of writing materials and techniques for preserving texts allowed philosophical works to be copied and distributed more widely. The careful work of scribes and scholars ensured that many philosophical texts would survive for future generations to study. During this period, philosophy became increasingly specialized and technical. Different schools developed their own vocabulary and methods of argument. Yet philosophy remained connected to practical life through ethics and political theory, addressing questions of how to live and how to organize society. The influence of philosophical schools extended into daily life through education and social networks. Wealthy families sent their children to study with philosophers, while philosophical ideas shaped political discourse and social values. As we rest here in our journey through philosophical history, we can reflect on how these developments created foundations that would influence thought for millennia to come. The questions raised by these ancient thinkers continue to resonate. What is the nature of reality? How can we know what is true? What makes a life worth living? The rise of philosophical schools and systematic thought represents a crucial transition from earlier, more scattered wisdom traditions. These developments created institutional structures and methodological approaches that would shape how philosophy would be practiced for centuries to come. The peaceful exchange of ideas across cultures and traditions during this period reminds us that philosophical insight can come from many sources. The willingness to consider different perspectives and engage in dialogue remains central to philosophical practice. As evening falls on the ancient world we've been exploring, we can imagine the oil lamps being lit in philosophical schools across the Mediterranean as students continue their discussions into the night. The quest for wisdom that began in these times continues to illuminate our own search for understanding. The legacy of this period would extend far beyond its immediate time and place. The philosophical methods, questions, and insights developed during this rise to power would provide tools and inspiration for countless generations of thinkers to come. As we prepare to move forward in our journey through philosophical history, we can carry with us the understanding that philosophy is both a personal quest for wisdom and a collective endeavor that spans cultures and centuries. The foundations laid during this period would support the continuing development of philosophical thought in new and unexpected directions. As we continue our journey through the evolution of philosophical thought, we arrive at a remarkable period of cultural and intellectual flowering that scholars often refer to as the Golden Age. This era, stretching across different civilizations and times, witnessed unprecedented achievements in human wisdom and understanding. Let us first turn our attention to ancient Greece, where the gentle Mediterranean breezes carried the whispered discussions of great thinkers through the olive groves and marble columns. In Athens, during the 5th century BCE, the streets buzzed with the quiet energy of intellectual discourse. Here, in the warm afternoon sun, Socrates would walk with his students, engaging them in his famous method of questioning, helping them discover truth through careful dialogue rather than mere instruction. The Athenian agora, filled with the soft murmur of daily commerce and philosophical debate, became the beating heart of this cultural renaissance. Merchants would pause in their trading to listen to wandering sophists and philosophers share their insights. The sweet scent of incense from nearby temples mixed with the earthier aromas of the marketplace, creating an atmosphere where the material and intellectual worlds seamlessly intertwined. In this nurturing environment, Plato established his academy around 387 BCE, nestled in a sacred grove just outside Athens. Picture the peaceful setting, a cluster of buildings surrounded by cypress trees, where students would gather in quiet courtyards to discuss metaphysics, mathematics, and the nature of reality. The academy became the first institution of higher learning in the Western world, its influence rippling through time like gentle waves across a still pond. Aristotle, who studied at Plato's academy for 20 years, would later establish his own school, the Lyceum. Here, amidst covered walkways and gardens, he developed his comprehensive philosophical systems, covering everything from logic and ethics to biology and physics. His students would walk with him along shaded paths, earning them the name peripatetics, from the Greek word for walking around. As we drift further east, we find another golden age unfolding in ancient India. During the Gupta Empire, 325–50 CE, Sanskrit literature reached new heights of refinement. The court of Chandragupta II resonated with the gentle verses of Kalidasa, whose poetry captured the essence of human emotion and natural beauty with unprecedented subtlety. The mathematical innovations of Aryabhata emerged during this period, including his groundbreaking work on the concept of zero and the calculation of pi. Buddhist monasteries and Hindu temples became centers of learning, their quiet halls filled with the soft rustle of palm leaf manuscripts and the measured tones of scholarly discourse. The famous university at Nalanda, established in the 5th century CE, drew students from across Asia. Imagine the peaceful atmosphere of its libraries, where monks and scholars would spend hours in contemplation, surrounded by thousands of carefully preserved texts. Meanwhile, in China, the Tang dynasty, 618–907 CE, ushered in another golden age of philosophical and cultural achievement. The capital city of Chang'an became the largest and most cosmopolitan city in the world, its wide streets lined with elegant buildings and filled with travelers from distant lands. Buddhist temples stood alongside Taoist monasteries and Confucian academies, creating a remarkable atmosphere of intellectual and spiritual diversity. The gentle scratching of brushes on paper could be heard in the homes of scholars as they practiced calligraphy, an art form that merged philosophical insight with aesthetic beauty. Poetry flourished under the Tang, with Li Bai and Du Fu crafting verses that would be treasured for centuries to come. Their words captured the subtle interplay between human emotion and natural beauty, often composed in peaceful gardens or remote mountain retreats. In the Islamic world, the Abbasid Caliphate, 750–1258 CE, fostered its own golden age of philosophical inquiry. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad became a center for translation and original research, where scholars worked diligently to preserve and build upon the intellectual heritage of Greece, India, and Persia. The soft glow of oil lamps would illuminate the pages of manuscripts late into the night, as translators and philosophers labored to expand human knowledge. Philosophers like Al-Farabi, known as the second teacher, after Aristotle, developed sophisticated systems that sought to harmonize Greek philosophy with Islamic theology. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, wrote his monumental works on medicine and philosophy, their influence spreading slowly but steadily across the medieval world like the gradual spread of dawn's first light. The Jewish philosophical tradition also flourished during this period, particularly in Islamic Spain. Moses Maimonides, working in the 12th century, created masterful syntheses of Jewish theology with Aristotelian philosophy. His works were often composed in the quiet hours before dawn, as he balanced his philosophical writings with his duties as a physician. Returning to Europe, we find the medieval period giving rise to its own philosophical achievements. Monasteries became centers of learning, their scriptoria filled with the patient work of monks copying and preserving ancient texts. The founding of universities in cities like Paris, Oxford, and Bologna created new spaces for philosophical discourse and debate. Thomas Aquinas, working in the peaceful environment of Dominican monasteries, produced his magnificent Summa Theologica, a work that sought to reconcile faith with reason, Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology. The medieval university system, with its careful organization of knowledge into the trivium and quadrivium, provided a structured approach to learning that would influence education for centuries to come. Throughout these various golden ages, we can observe certain common threads: the importance of institutional support for learning, the role of cross-cultural exchange in stimulating new ideas, and the value placed on preserving and building upon earlier wisdom. These periods of cultural achievement were not isolated moments, but part of a continuous flow of human thought and creativity. The development of writing systems and methods of preserving knowledge played a crucial role in these golden ages. In China, the invention of paper and woodblock printing allowed for wider dissemination of philosophical texts. In the Islamic world, improvements in papermaking and bookbinding created new possibilities for preserving and sharing knowledge. The quiet rustle of pages being turned became a sound synonymous with learning and contemplation. Art and architecture also reflected and supported philosophical development during these golden ages. The precise geometry of Islamic architecture, the balanced proportions of Greek temples, and the soaring spaces of Gothic cathedrals all expressed philosophical and theological ideas in material form. These spaces created environments conducive to contemplation and learning, their very design encouraging certain modes of thought and experience. The daily rhythm of life in these centers of learning followed patterns that promoted intellectual development. Early morning hours might be devoted to individual study, while afternoons could bring group discussions or lectures. Evening hours often saw scholars writing by lamplight, recording their thoughts and insights for future generations. Gardens played a special role in many of these philosophical traditions. The Academy's grove, the meditation gardens of Buddhist monasteries, and the courtyard gardens of Islamic madrasas all provided spaces where nature and thought could intermingle. The gentle sound of flowing water, the play of light through leaves, and the changing patterns of seasons all contributed to philosophical contemplation. These golden ages were not periods of sudden revolution, but of gradual, careful development. Ideas were refined over generations, each thinker building upon the work of those who came before. The process was like the slow growth of a tree, each year adding new rings of understanding to the accumulated wisdom of the past. The transmission of knowledge between cultures occurred through various channels. Trade routes carried not just goods but ideas. Scholars traveled between centers of learning, and translations made texts available to new audiences. This cross-pollination of ideas created rich hybrid traditions, as different philosophical systems encountered and influenced each other. The role of dialogue and debate was crucial in all these traditions. Whether in the form of Socratic questioning, Buddhist dialectics, or medieval disputations, the exchange of ideas through careful discussion helped refine and develop philosophical understanding. These discussions were not heated arguments but measured exchanges, each participant seeking to understand as much as to convince. The impact of these golden ages continues to resonate through time. The philosophical systems developed during these periods provided frameworks for understanding that would influence countless generations. The methods of teaching and learning they established would shape educational practices for centuries to come. As we reflect on these golden ages of philosophical achievement, we can appreciate the delicate balance they maintained between preservation and innovation, between individual insight and collective wisdom. Their example reminds us that the most profound developments in human thought often occur not in moments of dramatic breakthrough, but in periods of patient, sustained inquiry. The legacy of these golden ages lives on in the countless libraries, universities, and centers of learning that dot our modern world. Though the specific forms may have changed, the fundamental pursuit of wisdom and understanding continues, carried forward by each new generation of thinkers and seekers of knowledge. As we draw this portion of our journey to a close, we can sense how these golden ages of philosophical achievement laid the groundwork for future developments in human thought. Their influence would continue to shape intellectual life through the Renaissance and into the modern era, creating a continuous chain of wisdom that stretches across time and culture. Let us continue our journey through the philosophical traditions that have shaped human understanding of political organization and governance. As we drift deeper into contemplation, we'll explore how different societies structured their political lives and developed systems for organizing their communities. In the gentle evening air of ancient Athens, citizens would gather in the agora, their sandaled feet crossing worn marble paths as they came together to participate in what we now recognize as one of humanity's earliest experiments with democracy. The soft murmur of voices would rise and fall as they debated matters of state, their words carried on warm Mediterranean breezes between columns that still stand today. Around 508 BCE, Cleisthenes introduced reforms that would fundamentally reshape Athenian society, creating a system where citizens, free adult men, could participate directly in political decision-making. Picture the scene. Thousands of citizens ascending the hill to the Pnyx, taking their places on the stone seats, listening as speakers address the assembly. The air would have been filled with the rustle of olive leaves, the distant calls of seabirds, and the earnest voices of those seeking to persuade their fellow citizens. This democratic experiment wasn't without its critics. Plato, writing in his work, The Republic, around 380 BCE, expressed deep skepticism about democracy's ability to produce wise governance. In his academy, surrounded by students reclining on cool stone benches, he would articulate his vision of the philosopher king, a ruler whose wisdom and virtue would guide the state toward justice and truth. The soft scratching of styluses on wax tablets would accompany his teachings, as students recorded thoughts that would influence political philosophy for millennia to come. Meanwhile, in the bustling streets of ancient Rome, a different model of governance was taking shape. The Roman Republic, established around 509 BCE, developed a complex system of checks and balances, with power distributed among various offices and assemblies. Picture the Forum Romanum at dawn, as senators in their togas gathered to debate matters of state, their voices echoing off marble facades as the morning sun cast long shadows across the plaza. The Roman system introduced concepts that would resonate through the ages: the idea of representation, the balance of powers, and the codification of laws. In the quiet libraries of Rome, scholars would carefully copy and preserve the legal codes that would later form the foundation of many modern legal systems. The scratch of reed pens on papyrus, the soft rustle of scrolls being carefully handled, the murmured discussions of scribes, these were the sounds of knowledge being preserved and transmitted. As we drift forward through time, we encounter the medieval period, where different forms of political organization emerged across various cultures. In the stone halls of European castles, the feudal system created intricate webs of obligation and loyalty between lords and vassals. The sound of boots on flagstone floors, the crackle of fires in great halls, the metallic clash of ceremonial swords, these were the daily rhythms of feudal governance. Islamic scholars during the Golden Age of Baghdad were also contemplating questions of political organization. In the House of Wisdom, philosophers like Al-Farabi developed sophisticated theories about the ideal state, combining Greek philosophical traditions with Islamic principles. The quiet rustle of pages, the soft padding of feet on carpeted floors, the gentle splash of fountain water in courtyard gardens, these were the peaceful sounds accompanying profound political thought. In China, the Tang and Song dynasties developed highly sophisticated bureaucratic systems, with civil service examinations selecting officials based on merit rather than heredity. Picture the examination halls in Chang'an, where thousands of candidates would sit in individual cells, writing essays on classical texts as they competed for government positions. The scratch of brushes on paper, the occasional cough echoing through the vast hall, the tension-filled silence of concentrated effort. The Renaissance brought new ways of thinking about political organization. In Florence, Niccolò Machiavelli would write The Prince in his modest study, the scratch of his quill pen recording observations about political power that would challenge traditional moral assumptions about governance. The evening air would carry the sounds of church bells and street vendors through his window as he composed his revolutionary ideas. In the Age of Enlightenment, philosophers like John Locke, writing in his study at Oxford, would develop theories of natural rights and social contracts that would profoundly influence modern democratic systems. The soft ticking of his clock, the rustle of papers, the crackle of his fireplace would accompany his contemplation of fundamental political rights. These ideas would find dramatic expression in the American and French revolutions, though our story focuses not on the tumult of those events, but on the quiet moments of deliberation that preceded them. Picture the library at Monticello, where Thomas Jefferson would work late into the night, crafting documents that would help shape a new nation. The gentle scratch of his pen, the soft glow of candlelight, the distant sounds of Virginia wildlife drifting through open windows. In the peaceful gardens of Königsberg, Immanuel Kant would develop his ideas about perpetual peace and international organization, concepts that would later influence the development of international law and global institutions. The rustle of leaves, the distant church bells, the soft crunch of gravel under his famously regular walks would accompany his philosophical contemplations. The Industrial Revolution brought new challenges to political organization, as societies grappled with rapid technological and social change. In his reading room at the British Museum, Karl Marx would spend long hours analyzing these transformations, developing theories about economic and political structures that would influence global politics for generations. The quiet murmur of other readers, the soft footsteps of librarians, the distant rumble of London traffic would form the background to his studies. The Industrial Revolution brought profound changes to both daily life and social structure. As cities grew and new social classes emerged, philosophy began to engage more directly with questions of social justice and economic organization. Karl Marx developed his ideas while observing the conditions of workers in industrial Manchester, writing in the British Museum's reading room amid the quiet rustle of pages and the scratch of pens. The modern period has seen philosophy become increasingly professionalized, with most philosophers working within academic institutions. Their daily routines might involve teaching classes, attending department meetings, and conducting research in well-equipped libraries. Yet philosophy has also found new venues for expression, from public lectures to digital forums, making philosophical discussion more accessible than ever before. Throughout these periods, we can observe how daily life and social structure both shaped and were shaped by philosophical thought. The physical spaces where philosophy was practiced, from the ancient agora to modern university campuses, influenced the development of ideas. The social structures of different eras determined who could participate in philosophical discourse and under what conditions. The sensory experiences of daily life often found their way into philosophical writings. Plato's cave allegory drew on the experience of shadow plays popular in ancient Greece, while Descartes' meditations were influenced by the solitude of his heated room during a winter in Germany. These connections between everyday experience and abstract thought remind us that philosophy has always been grounded in the concrete realities of human life. As we reflect on these historical patterns, we can see how philosophical ideas emerged from and responded to the practical conditions of daily life in different eras. The social structures that supported philosophical activity have evolved over time, gradually becoming more inclusive and diverse. Yet certain constants remain: the need for time and space for contemplation, the importance of dialogue and discussion, and the way philosophical ideas both reflect and challenge the societies that produce them. The story of philosophy is not just a history of ideas, but a history of how people lived, worked, and thought together. As we drift toward sleep, let us appreciate how these patterns of daily life and social structure created the conditions for philosophical wisdom to emerge and evolve across the centuries, setting the stage for the continued development of human thought and understanding. As we explore the rich tapestry of human thought and belief throughout history, we find ourselves drawn into the profound ways that religion and philosophy have shaped civilization. Let us drift peacefully through time, examining how humans have sought to understand their place in the cosmos and find meaning in existence. In the earliest dawn of human consciousness, our ancestors looked up at the star-filled night sky and began to wonder about their place in the universe. Archaeological evidence suggests that religious and spiritual beliefs emerged as early as the Paleolithic period, with cave paintings and burial practices indicating a growing awareness of the sacred and supernatural. The gentle whispers of these ancient beliefs still echo through time, carried forward in stories and symbols that continue to resonate. As societies became more complex, organized religious systems began to take shape. In ancient Mesopotamia, where the warm winds swept across the fertile valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the people developed an intricate pantheon of gods. Each deity was associated with different aspects of life. Enlil governed the air and earth, while Enki was the god of wisdom and fresh water. The priests of these gods maintained elaborate temples, where the sweet scent of incense would rise with the morning sun as they performed their daily rituals. In ancient Egypt, along the life-giving Nile, religion was woven into every aspect of daily life. The pharaohs were seen as living incarnations of the god Horus, while the eternal cycle of death and rebirth was embodied in the story of Osiris and Isis. The careful preparation of the dead for their journey to the afterlife, the building of magnificent pyramids and temples, and the development of hieroglyphic writing all emerged from this rich religious tradition. Moving eastward, we find the development of philosophical and religious traditions that would profoundly influence human thought. In India, the Vedic tradition emerged around 1500 BCE, with its beautiful hymns and profound philosophical insights preserved in the Sanskrit language. The concepts of dharma, karma, and reincarnation took shape during this period, offering a comprehensive view of life's meaning and purpose. The gentle sound of temple bells and the soft chanting of mantras became part of the daily rhythm of life. Around 563 BCE, in what is now Nepal, Siddhartha Gautama was born into a life of privilege. His journey to become the Buddha, or Enlightened One, would give rise to one of the world's major philosophical and religious traditions. Buddhism spread slowly but steadily across Asia, its teachings of mindfulness and compassion offering a path to liberation from suffering. The peaceful presence of Buddhist monasteries, with their carefully tended gardens and meditation halls, became centers of learning and contemplation. In China, the thoughtful teachings of Confucius emerged around 500 BCE, emphasizing moral behavior, proper relationships, and social harmony. The quiet wisdom of his sayings would influence Chinese society for millennia to come. Alongside Confucianism, Taoism developed with its emphasis on living in harmony with nature and finding balance between opposing forces. The concept of yin and yang, represented in the familiar circular symbol, became a powerful metaphor for understanding life's complementary aspects. In the Mediterranean world, Greek philosophical thought began to flourish. Socrates walked the streets of Athens, engaging citizens in philosophical discussions that would challenge traditional beliefs and lay the groundwork for Western philosophical tradition. His student Plato would establish his academy, where students would contemplate the nature of reality, justice, and the good life. Aristotle, in turn, would develop systematic approaches to understanding both the natural world and human society. The emergence of monotheistic religions marked a significant shift in human religious thought. Judaism, with its belief in one God and its emphasis on ethical behavior, developed its rich traditions through centuries of both triumph and adversity. The careful preservation of sacred texts, the development of rabbinic scholarship, and the establishment of practices that would bind communities together all emerged from this tradition. Christianity arose in the 1st century CE, spreading gradually throughout the Roman Empire. The peaceful message of Jesus of Nazareth, transmitted through his disciples and early followers, would eventually transform the Roman world. The development of Christian theology, the building of churches and monasteries, and the preservation of learning during the medieval period all stemmed from this religious movement. In the 7th century CE, the Prophet Muhammad received revelations that would form the basis of Islam. The religion spread rapidly across the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond, creating a rich civilization that preserved and advanced human knowledge. The daily calls to prayer, the development of beautiful calligraphy, and the construction of magnificent mosques all reflected the deep influence of Islamic faith and culture. Throughout these developments, we can observe how religious and philosophical traditions often borrowed from and influenced each other. The translation movement in Baghdad during the Islamic Golden Age preserved and transmitted Greek philosophical works. Buddhist ideas traveled along the Silk Road, influencing and being influenced by other traditions they encountered. The quiet exchange of ideas across cultures and centuries created rich tapestries of human thought and belief. Monasteries and temples became centers of learning and culture. In medieval Europe, monks carefully copied manuscripts by candlelight, preserving ancient knowledge for future generations. In Tibet, monasteries perched high in the mountains became repositories of Buddhist wisdom and artistic tradition. In India, temples served as centers not only of worship, but of music, dance, and scholarship. The relationship between religion and society has often been complex. Religious institutions have sometimes worked to maintain social order and support political authority, while at other times they have challenged existing power structures and called for social change. The gentle tension between tradition and reform, between institutional authority and individual conscience, has been a constant theme in religious history. Religious traditions have also profoundly influenced art and culture. The soaring architecture of Gothic cathedrals, the intricate patterns of Islamic geometric design, the serene faces of Buddha statues, and the rich traditions of religious music and poetry all reflect the deep impact of religious belief on human creativity. The careful work of artisans and craftspeople, inspired by their faith, has left us countless treasures that continue to move and inspire. The development of religious and philosophical thought has not been without conflict. Different interpretations of religious teachings have led to divisions within traditions. The interaction between different religious groups has sometimes led to tension and conflict, while at other times it has resulted in peaceful coexistence and mutual enrichment. The quiet wisdom of religious leaders who have advocated for peace and understanding has often provided a counterbalance to forces of division. As we move toward more recent times, we see how religious and philosophical traditions have responded to new challenges and opportunities. The encounter with modern scientific knowledge, the development of new forms of social organization, and the increasing interconnectedness of our world have all prompted new theological and philosophical reflections. Yet the enduring questions about meaning, purpose, and human nature continue to engage us. Traditional religious practices continue to provide rhythm and meaning to many people's lives. The soft sound of prayer beads moving through fingers, the gentle sway of meditation, the shared meals of religious festivals, and the quiet moments of personal devotion all connect contemporary believers to ancient traditions while allowing for new expressions of faith and understanding. In our modern world, we see both the persistence of traditional religious beliefs and the emergence of new forms of spirituality and philosophical inquiry. The gentle wisdom of ancient traditions continues to offer guidance while adapting to contemporary circumstances. The ongoing dialogue between different religious and philosophical traditions enriches our understanding of the human experience. As we reflect on this journey through the history of religion and philosophical thought, we can appreciate the profound ways in which these traditions have shaped human civilization. From the earliest spiritual stirrings to the complex religious landscape of today, human beings have continuously sought to understand their place in the universe and find meaning in their existence. This quest continues to unfold as new generations encounter and interpret the wisdom of the past, while adding their own insights to the ongoing story of human spiritual and philosophical development. As we rest and contemplate the rich tapestry of human creativity, let us explore how art, architecture, and monuments have shaped philosophical thought throughout history. From the earliest cave paintings to the grandest cathedrals, humans have expressed their understanding of existence through creative works, each piece telling a story of how people perceived and interpreted their world. Let us begin our journey in the caves of prehistoric times, where our ancestors first made their mark upon stone walls. In places like Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain, dating back some 17,000 years, early humans created sophisticated paintings of animals and abstract symbols. These weren't merely decorative works. They represented humanity's first attempts to make sense of their world through symbolic expression, laying the groundwork for later philosophical inquiry. As civilizations emerged in Mesopotamia, the architectural form of the ziggurat arose, reaching toward the heavens in stepped layers. The Great Ziggurat of Ur, built around 2100 BCE, stood as a testament to humanity's desire to bridge the earthly and divine realms. These massive structures, built of sun-dried bricks and faced with fired bricks, represented the Mesopotamian understanding of the cosmos, a universe organized in layers, with humans occupying the space between earth and sky. In ancient Egypt, architecture took on even more profound philosophical significance. The Great Pyramid of Giza, completed around 2560 BCE, embodied Egyptian concepts of immortality and the afterlife. The precise geometric proportions and astronomical alignments of these monuments reflect a sophisticated understanding of mathematics and the universe's perceived order. The Egyptian belief that proper preservation of the body and proper burial practices could ensure eternal life influenced their architectural choices, leading to the construction of elaborate tomb complexes filled with art and hieroglyphic writings. Greek architecture introduced new philosophical principles through its emphasis on harmony, proportion, and rational order. The Parthenon, built between 447 and 432 BCE under the supervision of Phidias, represented the Greek ideal of perfect proportion. Its subtle curves and precise measurements embodied the Pythagorean belief in mathematical harmony as the underlying principle of the universe. The golden ratio, approximately 1.618 to 1, appeared throughout Greek architecture and art, suggesting a divine proportion that governed both beauty and truth. The Romans transformed Greek architectural principles into more practical applications, developing new construction techniques like the arch and concrete. The Pantheon in Rome, completed around 126 CE, with its perfect spherical dome, represented the Roman synthesis of Greek philosophical ideals with engineering innovation. The oculus at its center created a connection between earth and sky, suggesting humanity's place within the cosmic order. As we drift through time to the medieval period, we encounter the rise of Gothic architecture, which emerged in 12th century France. The Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, begun in 1163, exemplified how architectural design could express philosophical and theological concepts. The soaring vertical lines, pointed arches, and abundant light filtering through stained glass windows created an atmosphere that encouraged contemplation of the divine. The master builders used sacred geometry to create spaces that would inspire spiritual elevation. Islamic architecture developed its own philosophical expression through geometric patterns and calligraphy. The Great Mosque of Cordoba, begun in 784 CE, demonstrated how mathematical principles could create spaces of profound spiritual significance. The intricate arabesque patterns that adorned Islamic buildings represented the infinite nature of divine creation, while the absence of figurative art reflected theological principles about representation. In East Asia, different philosophical traditions shaped architectural forms. Chinese architecture, influenced by Confucian and Taoist principles, emphasized harmony with nature and proper orientation according to Feng Shui. The Forbidden City in Beijing, constructed between 1406 and 1420, exemplified these principles through its careful alignment with cardinal directions and its use of symbolic numbers and colors. Japanese architecture, particularly in temples and gardens, reflected Zen Buddhist philosophy's emphasis on simplicity and mindfulness. The rock garden at Ryonji Temple in Kyoto, created in the late 15th century, used minimal elements to create a space for meditation and contemplation. The careful arrangement of rocks and raked gravel represented the essence of Zen philosophy, finding profound meaning in simplicity. The Renaissance brought a renewed interest in classical philosophy and its expression through art and architecture. Filippo Brunelleschi's dome for the Florence Cathedral, completed in 1436, demonstrated how engineering innovation could serve philosophical and aesthetic ideals. Renaissance artists and architects studied perspective and proportion, seeking to understand how mathematical principles could reveal divine truth through human creativity. Leonardo da Vinci's works perfectly embodied the Renaissance ideal of universal knowledge. His drawings and designs showed how art, science, and philosophy could merge into a unified understanding of nature and human experience. The Vitruvian Man, created around 1490, illustrated the philosophical concept of man as the measure of all things, showing human proportions as a reflection of universal harmony. Baroque architecture, emerging in the late 16th century, expressed philosophical ideas about emotion and experience. Gian Lorenzo Bernini's colonnade at St. Peter's Square in Rome, completed in 1667, created a space that emphasized the church's embrace of its followers. The dramatic use of light, space, and movement in Baroque architecture reflected new philosophical ideas about human perception and emotional response. The Age of Enlightenment brought new philosophical approaches to architecture. Claude Nicolas Ledoux' Royal Saltworks at Arquet-Senans, designed in 1775, demonstrated how architectural design could express rational social organization and industrial efficiency. The growing emphasis on reason and progress influenced the development of new building types and urban planning principles. In the modern era, philosophical movements like functionalism and minimalism have continued to influence architectural design. Ludwig Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona Pavilion of 1929 expressed the modernist philosophy that form should follow function, while Frank Lloyd Wright's Fallingwater, completed in 1939, showed how architecture could harmonize with nature in new ways. Contemporary architecture continues to engage with philosophical questions about human experience, environmental responsibility, and social justice. Buildings like Peter Zumthor's thermal baths in Valls, Switzerland, completed in 1996, create spaces that encourage sensory awareness and contemplation of our relationship with the natural world. Throughout history, monuments have served as physical manifestations of philosophical ideas and cultural memory. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., designed by Maya Lin and completed in 1982, demonstrates how abstract form can create powerful emotional responses and encourage reflection on war, loss, and healing. The relationship between art, architecture, and philosophy continues to evolve. Digital technology and environmental concerns are raising new questions about the nature of space, experience, and human creativity. Virtual reality environments and sustainable architecture challenge traditional concepts of permanence and materiality in architectural expression. As we reflect on this journey through the history of art and architecture, we can see how human creativity has consistently sought to express our deepest philosophical questions and insights. From ancient cave paintings to contemporary sustainable design, our built environment reflects our ongoing search for meaning and understanding in the world around us. The monuments we create serve as bridges between past and future, carrying forward the philosophical insights of previous generations while inspiring new questions and explorations. As we rest here, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom expressed through human creativity, we can appreciate how art and architecture continue to shape our understanding of ourselves and our place in the universe. Each stone laid, each line drawn, each space created tells part of humanity's ongoing philosophical journey. As we prepare to explore other aspects of human thought and experience, we carry with us the understanding that our creative expressions are fundamental to our quest for wisdom and meaning. Let us pause here, allowing these images of human creativity to settle in our minds, as we prepare to continue our exploration of philosophy's rich history. The buildings and monuments we've encountered remind us that philosophical ideas take many forms, speaking to us not only through words, but through the spaces and structures that shape our daily lives. Let us now turn our attention to humanity's enduring quest to understand and harness the natural world through science, technology, and innovation. As we drift through the centuries of human achievement, we'll explore how our ancestors gradually unveiled the mysteries of existence through careful observation, experimentation, and ingenuity. In the earliest days of human civilization, our first technological innovations emerged from necessity and careful observation of the natural world. Picture the first toolmakers, sitting beside rivers and streams, carefully selecting stones and learning through trial and error how to chip and shape them into useful implements. This was humanity's first step into technological innovation, occurring over 2 million years ago when our distant ancestors began creating the first Alduin tools. Let us pause to imagine those ancient innovators, their fingers running across the smooth surfaces of river stones, testing edges and weights, listening to the distinctive sound of stone striking stone as they worked. The air would have been filled with the subtle percussion of their craft, the scent of freshly broken stone mixing with the earthy aromas of their riverside workshops. These early technological achievements laid the foundation for all that would follow. As we move forward in time, we find ourselves in ancient Mesopotamia, where the Sumerians developed one of humanity's most transformative innovations, writing. Around 3200 BCE, in the bustling cities of Uruk and scribes began pressing wedge-shaped marks into soft clay tablets, creating the system we now call cuneiform. Picture the quiet concentration of these early writers, their reed styluses moving methodically across the damp clay, recording inventories, laws, and eventually, stories and myths that would survive for millennia. In the fertile valleys of ancient Egypt, we find another wellspring of innovation. Egyptian engineers and architects developed sophisticated methods of construction, mathematics, and astronomy. Imagine the careful observations of the night sky that allowed them to create calendars based on the flooding of the Nile, the precise measurements that enabled them to build the perfectly aligned pyramids, and the development of practical technologies like the shadoof for irrigation and the sail for river navigation. Moving eastward, we encounter the remarkable achievements of ancient Chinese civilization. During the Han Dynasty, 202 BCE, 220 CE, Chinese inventors created paper, a technology that would eventually transform the world's ability to record and share knowledge. Picture the quiet workshops where craftsmen experimented with different materials, bark, hemp, old fishing nets, carefully pulping and pressing them until they achieved the perfect consistency for writing. The ancient Greeks brought us a new approach to understanding the natural world. In the 6th century BCE, in the bustling port city of Miletus, Thales began asking fundamental questions about the nature of reality, marking the beginning of natural philosophy, what we would later call science. Imagine walking through the Agora of Athens, hearing the discussions of Aristotle's students as they debated the nature of matter, motion, and the cosmos. In Alexandria, that great lighthouse of learning in the ancient world, scholars like Euclid developed geometric principles that would influence mathematics for millennia. Picture the great library of Alexandria, its shelves filled with scrolls containing the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world, scholars working quietly at their tables, making careful copies and annotations of scientific and mathematical texts. The Roman Empire brought practical innovation to new heights, developing technologies that would influence civilization for centuries to come. Consider the remarkable Roman aqueducts, spanning valleys and carrying fresh water for miles to supply their cities. Imagine the workshops of Roman engineers, working with precise measurements and carefully selected materials to create concrete that would survive for thousands of years. As we drift into the medieval period, we find ourselves in the Islamic Golden Age, where scholars preserved and expanded upon the scientific knowledge of antiquity. In Baghdad's House of Wisdom, translators and researchers worked to understand and improve upon Greek, Roman, and Indian scientific works. Picture the careful observations of astronomers like Al-Khwarizmi, developing mathematical concepts that would later be called algebra, or the precise measurements of al-Biruni as he calculated the Earth's circumference. In medieval European monasteries, monk scholars maintained scientific knowledge through the Dark Ages. Imagine the quiet scriptoria where they copied and illustrated scientific manuscripts, preserving ancient knowledge for future generations. In cathedral workshops, master builders applied sophisticated geometry and engineering principles to create soaring Gothic arches and delicate flying buttresses. The Renaissance brought a revolution in scientific thinking. In Florence, Leonardo da Vinci filled notebooks with careful observations and innovative designs, from flying machines to hydraulic pumps. Picture him in his workshop, carefully dissecting and drawing human anatomy, combining artistic skill with scientific observation in ways never before attempted. In 1543, Nicolaus Copernicus published his revolutionary work suggesting that the Earth revolved around the Sun, not the other way around. Imagine the quiet nights he spent observing the movements of the planets, carefully calculating their positions, gradually building his heliocentric model of the solar system. This would lead to the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries, when figures like Galileo Galilei would transform our understanding of the natural world. Picture Galileo in his garden in Padua, rolling balls down inclined planes, carefully timing their descent to understand the laws of motion. Imagine him turning his newly improved telescope toward the night sky, becoming the first person to see Jupiter's moons, the mountains on our own moon, and the phases of Venus observations that would help confirm Copernicus's theory. In England, Isaac Newton would build upon these foundations, developing his laws of motion and universal gravitation. Picture the young Newton at Trinity College, Cambridge, during the plague year of 1665, working alone in his family's garden, conducting experiments with prisms and light, developing calculus, and contemplating the force that made apples fall from trees. As we move into the 18th century, the pace of scientific discovery and technological innovation accelerates. The Industrial Revolution begins in England, with inventions like James Watt's improved steam engine transforming manufacturing and transportation. Picture the workshops where inventors like Richard Arkwright developed new spinning machines, revolutionizing textile production and changing the nature of work itself. In laboratories across Europe, scientists were unlocking new secrets of the natural world. Anton Lavoisier established modern chemistry, carefully measuring the products of chemical reactions and showing that matter could neither be created nor destroyed. Picture his precise experiments, conducted with equipment designed by his wife Marie-Anne, who illustrated their groundbreaking elementary treatise on chemistry. The study of military philosophy reveals the profound impact of human conflict on our understanding of ourselves and our world. From ancient battlefields to modern command centers, the questions raised by warfare continue to challenge philosophers and shape our collective wisdom. As we drift towards sleep, we might contemplate how these age-old questions still resonate in our time, their echoes carried forward through centuries of human experience. Let us now rest quietly with these thoughts, allowing our minds to settle like leaves after a storm, as we prepare to explore the next chapter in our journey through philosophical history. The steady rhythm of human thought continues its march through time, each generation adding its own understanding to our shared philosophical heritage. As we turn our attention to the internal conflicts and challenges that shaped philosophical thought throughout history, we find ourselves exploring some of humanity's deepest struggles with understanding existence, meaning, and truth. These intellectual battles, though fought without weapons, have been just as consequential as any military campaign in shaping our world. Let us begin in ancient Greece, where the first major philosophical tensions emerged between the pre-Socratic thinkers. As they contemplated the fundamental nature of reality, profound disagreements arose. Heraclitus proposed that everything was in constant flux, famously declaring that no one steps in the same river twice. In contrast, Parmenides argued that true reality was unchanging and that all apparent change was mere illusion. This fundamental tension between permanence and change would echo through philosophical discourse for millennia to come. The death of Socrates in 399 BCE marked a pivotal moment in philosophical conflict. Having been condemned to death for corrupting the youth and impiety against the gods, Socrates chose to accept his fate rather than flee, drinking the hemlock that would end his life. This tragic event highlighted the tension between philosophical inquiry and established social order, a conflict that would repeat throughout history in various forms. As we drift through time to the Hellenistic period, we find the emergence of competing schools of thought. The Stoics, led by thinkers like Zeno of Citium, emphasized self-discipline and acceptance of fate. The Epicureans, following Epicurus, sought happiness through simple pleasures and freedom from fear. The skeptics, meanwhile, questioned whether true knowledge was even possible. These schools often engaged in heated debates in the agoras and academies of ancient cities, their followers passionately defending their respective worldviews. The rise of Christianity brought new philosophical challenges. Early Christian thinkers like Augustine of Hippo struggled to reconcile Greek philosophical traditions with Christian doctrine. In his Confessions, written around 400 CE, Augustine described his personal journey through various philosophical systems before finding what he believed to be truth in Christianity. This internal struggle between faith and reason would become a defining feature of medieval philosophy. As we move into the Islamic Golden Age, we find philosophers like Al-Farabi and Avicenna grappling with similar challenges. How could they reconcile the rational traditions of Greek philosophy with Islamic revelation? Their attempts to synthesize these different ways of knowing created rich philosophical traditions that would later influence European thought. The medieval period brought its own unique philosophical tensions. The debate between realists and nominalists over the nature of universal concepts became particularly heated. Realists, following Plato's theory of forms, believed that universal concepts had real existence. Nominalists, on the other hand, argued that only particular things existed and that universal concepts were merely names we assign to groups of similar things. Thomas Aquinas, writing in the 13th century, faced the monumental task of reconciling Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology. His work represented both a resolution and a source of new conflicts, as not all Christians accepted his synthesis. The debate over the relationship between reason and faith continued to simmer. The Renaissance brought fresh challenges as newly rediscovered ancient texts confronted established medieval thought. Marsilio Ficino's translation of Plato's complete works into Latin in the 15th century sparked new debates about the nature of reality and knowledge. The recovery of ancient skeptical texts led thinkers like Michel de Montaigne to question all received wisdom, leading to both intellectual liberation and uncertainty. As we drift into the early modern period, we find Descartes sitting by his fire, undertaking his famous project of systematic doubt. His determination to find absolutely certain knowledge led him to question everything he thought he knew, eventually arriving at his famous conclusion: I think, therefore I am. This methodological skepticism would influence philosophy for centuries to come. The Enlightenment brought its own internal conflicts as thinkers debated the proper foundation for knowledge and morality. Empiricists like John Locke argued that all knowledge came from experience, while rationalists like Leibniz maintained that certain truths could be known through reason alone. This fundamental disagreement about the nature and sources of knowledge created rich philosophical discussions that continue to resonate. Immanuel Kant, working in the late 18th century, attempted to resolve these conflicts through his critical philosophy. His work represented both a synthesis and a revolution, showing how both reason and experience were necessary for knowledge, while also demonstrating the limits of human understanding. His ideas about the structure of human consciousness and the nature of moral duty created new debates even as they resolved old ones. The 19th century brought new philosophical challenges as thinkers grappled with rapid social and technological change. Hegel's dialectical philosophy suggested that conflict itself was essential to progress, with each thesis generating its antithesis, eventually leading to a higher synthesis. This view of philosophical progress through conflict would influence many later thinkers. Karl Marx adapted Hegel's dialectical method to analyze economic and social conflicts, arguing that philosophical problems were ultimately rooted in material conditions. His critique of capitalism and vision of historical progress through class struggle created new philosophical debates about the relationship between ideas and material reality. Friedrich Nietzsche challenged traditional philosophical assumptions about truth, morality, and meaning. His declaration that God is dead represented not just a theological statement but a philosophical crisis. How could we find meaning and value in a world without absolute truths or moral foundations? As we move into the 20th century, we find new philosophical conflicts emerging. The logical positivists of the Vienna Circle argued that only scientifically verifiable statements were meaningful, while existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre emphasized human freedom and the search for authentic existence in an absurd universe. The analytical tradition, developed by thinkers like Gottlob Frege and Bertrand Russell, focused on logical analysis and linguistic clarity. This approach sometimes came into conflict with continental philosophies' more expansive concerns with meaning, existence, and cultural critique. Ludwig Wittgenstein's work highlighted philosophical problems arising from language itself. His early work in the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus attempted to show the limits of language in expressing philosophical truths, while his later work in Philosophical Investigations suggested that many philosophical problems were actually linguistic confusions. The development of phenomenology by Edmund Husserl offered a new approach to philosophical investigation, focusing on the structure of conscious experience. This method influenced existentialist thinkers like Martin Heidegger, who raised fundamental questions about being and time that created new philosophical challenges. Postmodernist thinkers in the latter half of the 20th century questioned the very possibility of objective truth or universal philosophical systems. Philosophers like Jacques Derrida developed deconstruction as a method of analyzing texts and ideas, revealing hidden assumptions and contradictions. Throughout these centuries of philosophical development, we can observe certain recurring patterns of conflict between reason and faith, between empirical observation and rational deduction, between absolute truth and relative perspective, between individual freedom and social order. These tensions have not been merely academic exercises, but have reflected deep human struggles to understand ourselves and our place in the world. The history of philosophical conflicts reminds us that progress often comes through disagreement and debate. Each generation has faced its own philosophical challenges, building on the work of previous thinkers while also questioning their assumptions. This process continues today as philosophers grapple with questions raised by new technologies, environmental challenges, and changing social conditions. As we reflect on these philosophical conflicts, we might notice that they often mirror our own internal struggles to find truth and meaning. The questions that troubled ancient philosophers about the nature of reality, knowledge, justice, and the good life remain relevant to our own quest for understanding. The persistence of philosophical conflicts through history suggests both the difficulty and the importance of these fundamental questions. While we may not always find definitive answers, the process of philosophical inquiry itself helps us better understand our world and ourselves. As we continue to face new challenges and questions, the rich history of philosophical debate provides us with tools and perspectives for approaching these issues. Let us now rest quietly with these thoughts, allowing the steady stream of philosophical inquiry to carry us forward to new understanding, even as we acknowledge the continuing nature of these intellectual struggles. The path of philosophy, like the path of human understanding itself, is never completely smooth, but it is in navigating its challenges that we grow in wisdom. As the great civilizations of history developed and grew, they inevitably came into contact with one another, creating a rich tapestry of cultural exchange, diplomatic relations, and sometimes conflict. Let us explore these fascinating interactions that shaped the course of human thought and philosophy across the ancient and medieval worlds. In the warm valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the early Mesopotamian civilizations established some of the first documented diplomatic relations. Clay tablets from around 2300 BCE tell us of trade agreements and royal marriages between the city-states of Sumer, carefully negotiated in the shade of date palms and recorded by skilled scribes in cuneiform script. The gentle flow of goods along these ancient trade routes brought not just material wealth, but also new ideas and ways of thinking. The Egyptian civilization, cradled by the life-giving waters of the Nile, maintained complex diplomatic relationships with its neighbors. During the peaceful reign of Amenhotep III in the 14th century BCE, the Amarna letters reveal a network of correspondence between Egypt and other great powers of the Near East. Written in Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the time, these clay tablets speak of marriages, treaties, and the exchange of precious gifts. Picture the measured steps of messengers carrying these important communications across vast distances, their feet raising small clouds of dust on ancient roads. As we turn our attention to the eastern Mediterranean, we find the Phoenicians, those masterful sailors whose purple-dyed textiles and cedar wood were sought after throughout the ancient world. Their ships, guided by the stars and driven by the Mediterranean winds, established trading colonies from modern-day Lebanon to Spain. In their wake followed not just goods, but also their revolutionary alphabet, which would eventually evolve into the very letters we use today. The Greek civilization, emerging from its dark ages around 800 BCE, developed a particularly complex relationship with Persia. The interaction between these two great civilizations was not always peaceful, as evidenced by the Persian Wars, but it was invariably profound. Greek philosophers like Herodotus traveled through the Persian Empire, recording their observations and bringing back new perspectives that would influence Greek thought. The soft whispers of Persian ideas can be heard in the writings of Plato and Aristotle, speaking of concepts of kingship and governance that showed clear Eastern influences. In the quiet hours of study, Greek scholars in Alexandria pored over Egyptian texts, creating a remarkable synthesis of Greek and Egyptian knowledge. The Great Library of Alexandria became a testament to this intellectual exchange, housing scrolls from across the known world. Imagine the rustle of papyrus as scholars carefully unrolled ancient texts, the scratch of reed pens as they made copies, and the murmur of discussions in multiple languages echoing through the columned halls. The rise of Rome brought new dimensions to these civilizational interactions. Unlike the Greeks, who often viewed other cultures with skepticism, the Romans showed a remarkable ability to absorb and adapt foreign influences. They adopted Greek philosophy, Egyptian religious elements, and Persian military techniques, weaving them into their own cultural fabric. The Roman roads, stretching like stone ribbons across 3 continents, facilitated not just the movement of legions, but also the exchange of ideas. In the peaceful courtyards of Roman villas, philosophers from different traditions would gather to debate and share their wisdom. Stoic philosophy, which had originated in Greece, found fertile ground in Rome, where it was adapted and transformed by thinkers like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius. The gentle evening breeze might carry the sound of philosophical discussions in Latin, Greek, and other languages, as ideas flowed as freely as the wine in their cups. During the Han Dynasty in China, the famous Silk Road began to connect east and west in unprecedented ways. Caravans carrying silk, spices, and precious stones also transported books, religious texts, and philosophical treatises. Buddhist ideas traveled from India to China, where they merged with indigenous Confucian and Taoist thought to create new philosophical syntheses. Picture the slow progress of camel caravans across the vast expanses of Central Asia, each step bringing different worlds closer together. In the cool shade of Buddhist monasteries along the Silk Road, monks from different traditions would meet and exchange ideas. Chinese pilgrims like Xuanzang made arduous journeys to India, returning with hundreds of Sanskrit texts that they would spend years translating into Chinese. The gentle sound of temple bells would mix with the chanting of sutras in multiple languages, creating a harmony of cultural exchange. The spread of Islam from the 7th century CE created new networks of intellectual exchange. The Abbasid Caliphate, centered in Baghdad, established the House of Wisdom, where scholars translated Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic. In the quiet rooms of this great institution, the works of Aristotle were preserved and commented upon, eventually finding their way back to Europe through Muslim Spain. The scratch of pens and the rustle of pages marked the patient work of preservation and translation that would help spark the European Renaissance. In the cool courtyards of Cordoba and Toledo, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scholars worked together to translate and interpret ancient texts. The air would be filled with the soft murmur of different languages as they struggled to find the right words to convey complex philosophical concepts across linguistic and cultural boundaries. This peaceful cooperation produced remarkable results, preserving and extending the philosophical heritage of humanity. The medieval period saw the development of new forms of cross-cultural interaction. The Crusades, though primarily military in nature, led to increased contact between European and Middle Eastern civilizations. Crusader states became points of cultural exchange, where Eastern and Western ideas met and mingled. In the bustling markets of Jerusalem and Antioch, different languages and traditions would mix as freely as the spices sold in the bazaars. The Mongol Empire, though often remembered for its military conquests, created an unprecedented network of communication and exchange across Eurasia. Under the Pax Mongolica, merchants and missionaries could travel safely from Europe to China. Marco Polo's famous journey was just one example of the increased contact between distant civilizations that this period allowed. The sound of hooves on ancient roads carried not just warriors, but also ideas and innovations across vast distances. In the quiet scriptoria of medieval European monasteries, monks carefully copied and studied texts that had traveled thousands of miles and passed through many hands to reach them. Arabic numerals replaced Roman ones, making complex calculations easier. Indian mathematical concepts, preserved and developed by Muslim scholars, found their way into European universities. The scratch of quills on parchment marked the patient work of preserving and transmitting knowledge across cultures and centuries. The Renaissance in Europe was, in many ways, the fruit of these centuries of cross-cultural interaction. When scholars fled Constantinople with precious Greek manuscripts in 1453, they found eager audiences in Italian cities. The rediscovery of ancient texts, preserved through long chains of translation and transmission, sparked new ways of thinking about the world. In the studios of Florence and Venice, artists incorporated techniques and motifs from distant lands into their work. Throughout these centuries of interaction, philosophical ideas showed a remarkable ability to cross cultural boundaries. Concepts would be adopted and adapted, transformed by each culture they encountered, while retaining something of their original essence. The gentle flow of ideas across borders and boundaries enriched the philosophical traditions of all who participated in these exchanges. In the universities that began to emerge in medieval Europe, scholars would gather to debate ideas that had originated in ancient Greece, been preserved and commented upon in Baghdad and Cordoba, and finally made their way back to European soil. The quiet halls would echo with discussions in Latin, as students and teachers worked to understand and build upon this inherited wisdom. The interaction between civilizations also led to practical innovations that changed daily life. New crops and agricultural techniques spread along trade routes, changing what people ate and how they lived. Medical knowledge passed from one culture to another, enriching each tradition it encountered. The soft rustle of paper, a Chinese invention that reached Europe through the Muslim world, would gradually replace the scratch of reed pens on papyrus and parchment. As we reflect on these centuries of interaction between civilizations, we can see how each culture contributed to a growing body of human knowledge and wisdom. Ideas flowed like rivers between different lands, sometimes meeting resistance, sometimes finding new channels, but always moving forward. The philosophical heritage we have inherited is the result of countless such exchanges, preserved and transmitted by generations of scholars and thinkers. In the quiet hours of study and contemplation, philosophers and scholars in different lands would ponder the same fundamental questions about existence, knowledge, and the good life. Though they might express their thoughts in different languages and draw on different traditions, they were all participating in a great conversation that transcended cultural boundaries. The soft whisper of their thoughts has echoed through the centuries, reaching us today as we continue to build upon their wisdom. As the medieval period drew to a close, these networks of exchange would set the stage for the great transformations of the modern era. The philosophical traditions that had developed through centuries of cross-cultural interaction would provide the foundation for new ways of thinking about the world and humanity's place in it. But that is a story for another time, as we continue our journey through the history of human thought and wisdom. As we continue our journey through the history of philosophical thought, we now enter a period marked by significant decline and mounting external pressures that would reshape the intellectual landscape. Let us drift peacefully through these challenging times, observing how great philosophical traditions adapted and evolved in response to changing circumstances. In the latter years of the Roman Empire, around the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, philosophical schools that had flourished for centuries began to experience mounting difficulties. The once bustling academies of Athens and Alexandria saw their attendance gradually diminish, as economic instability and political uncertainty drew resources away from intellectual pursuits. The marble corridors that had echoed with passionate debates grew quieter, though the wisdom of the ages still lingered in their shadows. The Neoplatonic school, led by the brilliant Plotinus in the 3rd century CE, represented both the culmination and transformation of classical Greek philosophy. In his quiet garden in Rome, Plotinus would teach small groups of dedicated students, explaining how all reality emanated from a supreme, transcendent one. His writings, later collected as the Enneads by his student Porphyry, offered a serene vision of unity underlying all existence. The gentle rustling of olive trees would accompany his lectures, as he sought to guide his followers toward contemplative union with the divine. As external pressures mounted on the Roman Empire, philosophical institutions faced increasing challenges. The rise of Christianity brought new intellectual frameworks that sometimes viewed classical philosophy with suspicion. Yet rather than outright rejection, many early Christian thinkers like Augustine of Hippo worked to synthesize Greek philosophical ideas with Christian theology. In his sun-dappled study in North Africa, Augustine would pore over texts of Plato and Plotinus, finding in them insights that could illuminate Christian truth. The gradual decline of urban life and civic institutions in the Western Empire affected philosophical activity profoundly. The traditional model of philosophy schools supported by wealthy patrons became increasingly difficult to maintain. Philosophers adapted by forming smaller circles of students, often in private homes or religious settings. The smell of oil lamps would fill these intimate spaces as master and pupils explored eternal questions together, their voices soft but earnest in the gathering dusk. In the Eastern Empire, particularly in Alexandria and Constantinople, philosophical activity continued with greater vigor, though it too faced mounting challenges. The great library of Alexandria, which had been partially destroyed in earlier conflicts, suffered further decline. The loss of countless ancient texts created gaps in philosophical knowledge that would never be fully recovered. Yet dedicated scholars continued to preserve and copy what remained, their careful hands moving across parchment day after day in quiet scriptoria. The Persian Empire's expansion in the east put pressure on Byzantine territories, affecting trade routes and cultural exchange. Philosophy schools in cities near the frontier had to relocate or close entirely. The soft padding of sandaled feet along colonial streets grew less frequent as urban populations declined. Yet even in these difficult times, philosophical inquiry persisted, adapting to new circumstances and finding new forms of expression. In the 6th century CE, the Emperor Justinian's closure of the Academy in Athens in 529 marked a symbolic end to the classical tradition of philosophical education. The last scholars of the Academy, carrying precious manuscripts and teaching materials, sought refuge in Persia. Their journey across dusty roads and mountain passes represented both an ending and a beginning, the transmission of Greek philosophy to new lands and cultures. Meanwhile, in the monasteries that were becoming centers of learning throughout Europe, monks began the patient work of preserving ancient philosophical texts through copying and translation. In quiet scriptoria, with only the scratch of quill on parchment breaking the silence, they maintained the thread of philosophical tradition through the darkening times ahead. The faint scent of ink and parchment filled these spaces where wisdom was preserved one careful letter at a time. The Arab conquest of much of the Byzantine Empire and Persia in the 7th and 8th centuries created new challenges, but also new opportunities for philosophical transmission. As Greek texts were translated into Arabic, new audiences encountered classical philosophy. In the great translation centers of Baghdad and Damascus, scholars worked diligently to render complex philosophical concepts into Arabic, often debating late into the night about the precise meaning of ancient terms. The decline of traditional philosophical institutions led to a transformation in how philosophical knowledge was transmitted and preserved. Instead of public lectures in grand colonnades, philosophy increasingly found its home in religious settings, monasteries, madrasas, and private study circles. The sound of church bells or the call to prayer would now mark the rhythm of philosophical discussions, as wisdom was sought within new frameworks of understanding. Economic pressures affected philosophical activity in various ways. The decline in urban prosperity meant fewer wealthy patrons to support philosophers in schools. Scholars often had to combine philosophical work with other occupations, teaching grammar or rhetoric to earn their living. The marketplace echoes that had once provided background to philosophical debates grew fainter as cities contracted. Yet even as traditional institutions declined, philosophy found new expressions and audiences. The development of medieval universities beginning in the 11th and 12th centuries would eventually provide new homes for philosophical inquiry. In Paris, Oxford, and Bologna, the questions that had occupied ancient minds would find fresh consideration in new contexts. The physical environment of philosophical activity changed dramatically during this period of decline. Gone were the grand public spaces and purpose-built schools of classical times. Philosophy now happened in converted buildings, private homes, and religious institutions. The smell of incense might mingle with the dust of ancient manuscripts as scholars worked to preserve and understand the wisdom of the past. The role of philosophy in society also shifted. Rather than being seen as an independent pursuit of wisdom, philosophy increasingly became viewed as a handmaiden to theology. This changed the nature of philosophical questions and methods, though the fundamental human desire to understand reality and our place in it remained constant. The decline of classical philosophical institutions coincided with significant changes in how knowledge was recorded and transmitted. The shift from papyrus to parchment, though more expensive, provided more durable materials for preserving texts. The development of new scripts and writing methods allowed for more efficient copying and storage of philosophical works. Throughout this period, philosophical activity became more private and contemplative. The grand public debates of the classical period gave way to quiet study and careful commentary. The scratch of pen on parchment and the rustle of turning pages became the primary sounds of philosophical work, rather than the animated discussions of the ancient agora. The experience of ordinary people during this time of decline and pressure varied greatly by region and circumstance. In some areas, philosophical knowledge became more restricted to elite circles, while in others, new forms of popular wisdom literature emerged. The conversations of merchants in marketplaces and travelers in caravanserais might still touch on philosophical themes, though perhaps not in the technical language of the schools. Environmental factors also played a role in this period of decline. Climate changes affecting agriculture and trade routes influenced the prosperity of cities and their ability to support intellectual activity. Natural disasters and plagues further disrupted the transmission of philosophical knowledge, as communities struggled with more immediate concerns of survival. Yet even in decline, philosophy demonstrated remarkable resilience. Ideas found new paths of transmission, crossing linguistic and cultural boundaries. The wisdom of ancient Greece and Rome was preserved and transformed through translation into Arabic, Syriac, and eventually medieval Latin. Each translation added new layers of interpretation and understanding. The sensory experience of philosophical activity changed during this period. Instead of the open-air discussions of the classical period, philosophy retreated to more enclosed spaces. The smell of manuscript dust and lamp oil, the sound of quiet footsteps in stone corridors, and the feel of rough parchment under studying hands became the physical context of philosophical work. The decline of traditional philosophical institutions led to innovations in teaching methods. Unable to rely on established schools, philosophers developed new ways to transmit knowledge to small groups of students. The intimate setting of private instruction allowed for more personal guidance in philosophical development, though it limited the spread of ideas to wider audiences. As external pressures mounted, philosophers often had to balance their intellectual pursuits with practical concerns of survival and security. Some found protection in religious institutions, others in the courts of rulers who valued learning. The uncertain times led to new philosophical questions about the nature of change, stability, and human resilience in the face of adversity. The geographical spread of philosophical activity shifted during this period. As traditional centers declined, new ones emerged. The movement of scholars and texts created networks of philosophical transmission that would shape intellectual history for centuries to come. The sound of different languages and the mixing of cultural traditions created new philosophical syntheses. The impact of these changes would be felt long into the future. The decline of classical philosophical institutions and the pressures that caused it would transform how subsequent generations engaged with philosophical questions. Yet through all these changes, the fundamental human desire to understand ourselves and our world remained constant, finding new expressions in changing circumstances. As we draw this section to a close, we can reflect on how periods of decline and external pressure, while challenging, often lead to new adaptations and innovations. The quiet persistence of philosophical inquiry through difficult times demonstrates its fundamental importance to human culture. As we rest here for a moment, we can appreciate how wisdom finds ways to endure and evolve, even in the most challenging circumstances. As we continue our journey through the evolving landscape of philosophical thought, we arrive at a period of profound transformation that would reshape the very foundations of human understanding. The fall of traditional systems of knowledge and the emergence of new ways of thinking created ripples that continue to influence our modern world. In the late medieval period, around the 14th century, we witnessed the gradual dissolution of the unified philosophical worldview that had dominated European thought for centuries. The careful synthesis of Christian theology and Aristotelian philosophy, masterfully constructed by figures like Thomas Aquinas, began to show signs of strain. The world was changing, and with it, the ways humans sought to understand their place within it. Picture yourself walking through the narrow streets of a medieval university town, perhaps Oxford or Paris, where the air is thick with the sound of scholarly debates echoing from stone buildings. Here, in these centers of learning, a transformation was quietly taking place. The traditional scholastic method, with its emphasis on reconciling classical authorities with Christian doctrine, was being challenged by new approaches to knowledge. William of Ockham, working in the early 14th century, introduced what would become known as Ockham's razor, the principle that among competing explanations, the simplest should be preferred. This seemingly straightforward idea would have far-reaching consequences, gradually undermining the complex theoretical structures of medieval philosophy. Imagine scholars in their wooden-beam studies, surrounded by carefully preserved manuscripts, beginning to question the elaborate systems they had inherited. Black Death, which swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, accelerated these changes in unexpected ways. The devastating plague killed perhaps a third of Europe's population, and with it died many of the certainties that had sustained medieval thought. In the aftermath, people began to question traditional authorities more openly. The smell of herbs burned to ward off disease mixed with the incense of churches where priests struggled to explain why their prayers seemed powerless against the pestilence. As we move into the 15th century, we find ourselves in the early Renaissance, where the rediscovery of classical texts brought new perspectives to philosophical discourse. In Florence, scholars gathered in the Platonic Academy established by Cosimo de' Medici, their discussions illuminated by oil lamps as they pored over newly translated manuscripts from Constantinople. The fall of that great city to the Ottomans in 1453 had driven many Greek scholars westward, bringing with them precious texts and alternative philosophical traditions. The sound of quill pens scratching on parchment filled the studies of humanist scholars as they worked to recover and understand ancient wisdom. Marsilio Ficino laboriously translated Plato's complete works into Latin, making them widely available to Western readers for the first time. In his villa overlooking Florence, surrounded by the gentle Tuscan landscape, he developed a new synthesis of Platonic philosophy and Christian thought, one that emphasized the dignity and potential of human beings. This period saw the gradual transformation of how knowledge itself was understood. The medieval conception of truth as something to be discovered through careful analysis of authoritative texts began to give way to more empirical approaches. In universities across Europe, scholars began to question whether truth could be found solely in ancient books, or whether direct observation of nature might yield deeper insights. The invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440 accelerated these changes dramatically. The mechanical sound of the press, the smell of ink and paper, became the harbingers of a new age of learning. Ideas could now spread more quickly and widely than ever before, challenging traditional authorities and enabling new voices to be heard. In the courts and cities of Renaissance Italy, a new philosophical outlook emerged that would transform European thought. Pico della Mirandola's Oration on the Dignity of Man, written in 1486, proclaimed human beings as creatures of infinite possibility, free to shape their own nature. This marked a profound shift from medieval conceptions of human nature as fixed and fallen. The transformation extended beyond the realm of pure philosophy. In workshops and studios across Europe, artists like Leonardo da Vinci were developing new ways of seeing and understanding the world. Leonardo's notebooks, filled with careful observations of nature and human anatomy, represented a new approach to knowledge that combined theoretical understanding with practical investigation. As we move into the 16th century, we find ourselves in an age of increasing uncertainty and change. The Protestant Reformation, initiated by Martin Luther's challenge to church authority in 1517, shattered the religious unity of Western Europe. This religious upheaval had profound philosophical implications, raising questions about the nature of authority, truth, and individual conscience. In the quiet of his study in Bordeaux, Michel de Montaigne developed a new form of philosophical writing, the essay. His works, beginning in the 1570s, reflected a new skepticism about human knowledge and a focus on self-understanding. The gentle rustle of pages turning in his tower library accompanied his meditations on human nature and the limits of knowledge. The transformation of philosophical thought was accompanied by dramatic changes in how humans understood the physical universe. Nicolaus Copernicus's work, published in 1543, suggested that the Earth moved around the Sun, not the reverse. This astronomical revolution would eventually undermine the entire medieval worldview with its hierarchical conception of the cosmos. In the gardens and courts of Europe, natural philosophers began to conduct careful experiments, laying the groundwork for what would become modern science. The air was filled with the scent of herbs in botanical gardens where scholars studied medicinal plants, while in private laboratories, the sounds of bubbling apparatus and clicking mechanisms marked new approaches to understanding nature. The fall of traditional philosophical systems created space for new ways of thinking about human society and politics. Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince, written in 1513, represented a radical break with medieval political philosophy, analyzing power relations in stark, practical terms rather than through the lens of Christian moral teaching. As we approach the end of the 16th century, we find ourselves on the cusp of the scientific revolution. The careful observations of Tycho Brahe, made from his observatory on the island of Hven, provided the data that would allow Johannes Kepler to discover the laws of planetary motion. The night sky, viewed through increasingly sophisticated instruments, revealed new wonders that challenged ancient certainties. In universities and private academies, scholars began to develop new methods for investigating nature. Francis Bacon's Novum Organum, published in 1620, proposed a new system of logical reasoning based on careful observation and experimentation. The smell of wood smoke from laboratory fires mixed with the musty scent of library books as this new approach to knowledge took shape. The transformation of philosophical thought during this period was not limited to Europe. In China, scholars of the Ming Dynasty were engaging with new interpretations of classical Confucian texts, while in the Islamic world, philosophers continued to develop sophisticated systems of thought that combined religious insight with rational inquiry. As we move toward the dawn of the modern era, we can hear the echoes of these transformations in the writings of René Descartes. His Discourse on the Method, published in 1637, proposed a radical new approach to philosophical thinking, beginning with systematic doubt of all received knowledge. The sound of his pen scratching on paper in his warm study in the Netherlands marked the beginning of modern philosophy. The fall of traditional systems and the transformation of philosophical thought created new possibilities for human understanding. In courts and universities, in private studies and public squares, people engaged with new ideas about the nature of knowledge, truth, and human potential. The air was filled with the sound of debate, the rustle of newly printed books, and the quiet concentration of scholars pursuing new paths to understanding. This period of fall and transformation set the stage for the emergence of modern philosophy. The careful balance of medieval thought had given way to more dynamic and uncertain ways of understanding the world. Yet in this uncertainty lay the seeds of new discoveries and insights that would shape the centuries to come. As night falls over the great universities and quiet studies where these transformations took place, We can imagine the candlelight flickering on pages of newly printed books, the soft sound of scholars in discussion, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of ink and parchment through open windows. These changes in how humans understood themselves and their world would continue to evolve, leading us toward the modern era and new ways of philosophical thinking. As the great philosophical traditions we've explored underwent profound transformations, their enduring influence continued to shape human thought and society in ways that resonate deeply through the centuries to our present day. Let us reflect now on the lasting legacy of these philosophical movements and how their wisdom continues to illuminate our modern world. The ancient Greek philosophical tradition, beginning with those first bold thinkers who looked to reason rather than myth to explain the cosmos, established patterns of rational inquiry that would become the foundation of Western intellectual life. Socrates' method of careful questioning to expose assumptions and reach deeper understanding remains a cornerstone of education and critical thinking. In law courts and classrooms around the world, the Socratic method continues to challenge students and seekers of truth to examine their beliefs more carefully. The systematic philosophical frameworks developed by Plato and Aristotle provided conceptual tools that would influence fields far beyond philosophy itself. Plato's theory of forms, suggesting an ideal realm beyond the physical world, would profoundly shape Christian theology through Neoplatonism, while also inspiring countless artists and poets to seek transcendent beauty in their work. Aristotle's logical methods and systematic categorization of knowledge formed the basis for scientific thinking, while his ethical writings on virtue and the good life continue to inform modern discussions of character and morality. The philosophical schools that flourished in the Hellenistic period, the Stoics, Epicureans, and skeptics, developed practical approaches to finding peace of mind and living well that remain remarkably relevant today. Stoic teachings about focusing on what lies within our control, while accepting what doesn't have found new life in modern cognitive behavioral therapy and resilience training. The Epicurean emphasis on simple pleasures and freedom from anxiety speaks to contemporary concerns about consumerism and the search for authentic happiness. Eastern philosophical traditions have left equally profound legacies that continue to shape billions of lives. The teachings of Confucius about social harmony, moral cultivation, and proper relationships between people have deeply influenced East Asian societies for over 2 millennia. His emphasis on education and merit rather than hereditary privilege helped create systems of civil service examination that modernized government administration. Even today, Confucian values regarding family obligation, respect for learning, and social responsibility remain powerful cultural forces across East Asia. Buddhist philosophy's sophisticated analysis of the nature of mind and reality has attracted increasing attention from Western psychologists and neuroscientists. Its practical techniques for developing mindfulness and compassion through meditation have been adapted into secular therapeutic practices that help millions cope with stress and emotional difficulties. The Buddhist understanding of the interconnected nature of all phenomena has also influenced environmental ethics and systems thinking. The great synthesis of Greek and Abrahamic thought achieved by medieval Islamic philosophers preserved and expanded upon classical learning during Europe's darker periods. Scholars like Al-Farabi, Avicenna, and Averroes developed sophisticated metaphysical systems that would later influence both Jewish and Christian theology. Their commentaries on Aristotle helped spark the revival of classical learning in medieval Europe, while their original contributions to logic, mathematics, and empirical science helped lay the groundwork for the scientific revolution. The medieval Christian philosophical tradition, though often caricatured as merely theological, developed subtle analyses of logic, language, and cognition that would influence modern philosophy and linguistics. Scholars like Peter Abelard and William of Ockham refined logical tools for analyzing arguments that remain relevant to contemporary philosophical debate. The medieval university system they helped create, organized around rational discourse and systematic investigation, became a model for higher education globally. During the Renaissance and early modern period, philosophers began applying reason more systematically to understanding the natural world, helping to birth modern science. The empirical methods advocated by Francis Bacon and the mathematical approach of Galileo established new standards for knowledge based on careful observation and experimental testing. Descartes' philosophical framework, though its specific conclusions are often rejected today, helped establish the modern conception of mind and consciousness as subjects for systematic investigation. The Enlightenment philosophers of the 17th and 18th centuries articulated principles of individual rights, religious tolerance, and constitutional government that would reshape the political landscape. The political philosophy of John Locke influenced the American and French revolutions, while Montesquieu's analysis of the separation of powers became a blueprint for modern democratic governments. The Enlightenment ideal of progress through reason and science continues to inspire technological and social advancement. The social and political philosophy developed in the modern era has profoundly shaped how we think about justice, equality, and human flourishing. Marx's critique of capitalism and analysis of economic forces in history continues to influence social movements and economic thinking. John Stuart Mill's arguments for individual liberty and women's equality helped advance civil rights and feminism. The pragmatist philosophy of John Dewey shaped progressive education and democratic theory. In the realm of ethics, philosophical frameworks continue to help us navigate complex moral challenges. Kant's categorical imperative offers a way to test the universalizability of moral principles. Utilitarian thinking about maximizing welfare influences public policy and economic planning. Virtue ethics derived from Aristotle informs character education and professional ethics. Environmental ethics draws on multiple traditions to address humanity's relationship with nature. The philosophical analysis of knowledge and truth has evolved to address contemporary challenges. Epistemological frameworks help us evaluate competing truth claims in an era of information overload. Philosophy of science provides tools for understanding the scope and limits of scientific knowledge. Critical theory offers ways to examine how power shapes knowledge and discourse. The influence of philosophical ideas extends into everyday life in countless ways. Concepts of personal identity and authenticity shaped by existentialist thinkers inform how people think about their life choices and relationships. Philosophical perspectives on mind and consciousness influence psychology and artificial intelligence research. Ethical frameworks derived from various traditions guide professional conduct and public policy. The legacy of philosophical thinking can be seen in the very language we use to discuss important issues. Terms like rational, objective, rights, justice, and freedom carry meanings shaped by centuries of philosophical debate. The logical and argumentative tools developed by philosophers help structure public discourse and legal reasoning. Philosophical analysis helps clarify conceptual confusion in debates about science, politics, and ethics. In education, philosophical traditions continue to shape how we think about learning and development. The Socratic method encourages active engagement rather than passive reception of knowledge. Aristotelian ideas about habit formation inform character education. Dewey's emphasis on learning through experience influences progressive educational methods. Critical thinking skills derived from philosophical training are valued across disciplines. The influence of philosophy extends into the arts and culture. Aesthetic theories developed by philosophers from Plato to the present inform art criticism and creative practice. Philosophical ideas about beauty, meaning, and human experience inspire artists and writers. Cultural criticism draws on philosophical frameworks to analyze media and social trends. In the realm of religion and spirituality, philosophical thinking helps people examine and articulate their beliefs and values. Religious philosophers continue to address questions about faith, reason, and the meaning of life. Interfaith dialogue benefits from philosophical tools for comparing and translating between different belief systems. Secular philosophy offers frameworks for finding meaning and purpose without traditional religious beliefs. Looking to the future, philosophical thinking remains vital for addressing emerging challenges. Environmental philosophy helps us think about humanity's relationship with nature in an era of climate change. Philosophy of technology examines ethical questions raised by artificial intelligence and biotechnology. Political philosophy grapples with questions of justice and governance in an interconnected world. The enduring value of philosophy lies not just in specific answers, but in its methods of careful thinking and questioning. Philosophical training develops skills in analysis, argument, and conceptual clarity that are valuable across fields. The philosophical commitment to examining assumptions and seeking deeper understanding remains essential for addressing complex problems. As we face unprecedented challenges and opportunities in the 21st century, the rich heritage of philosophical wisdom offers resources for understanding and action. Ancient insights about virtue and the good life remain relevant to personal development. Classical political philosophy informs debates about democracy and justice. Buddhist ideas about interconnection speak to environmental awareness. Islamic philosophical traditions offer models of integrating faith and reason. The history of philosophy reminds us that the great questions about knowledge, reality, and how to live well have been explored by countless thinkers across cultures and centuries. Their insights and methods, refined through debate and application, continue to illuminate our path forward. While specific answers may change, the philosophical commitment to seeking wisdom through reason and reflection remains as valuable as ever. As we conclude our journey through the history of philosophy, we can appreciate how these intellectual traditions have shaped human civilization and continue to influence how we think and live. The legacy of philosophical wisdom, passed down through generations of teachers and students, remains a vital resource for understanding ourselves and our world. May we continue to draw upon this rich heritage as we face the challenges of our time and seek to create a better future. As our journey through the grand tapestry of philosophical thought draws to its peaceful close, let us pause to reflect on the remarkable path we have traveled together. Like ancient wayfarers returning from a long pilgrimage, we carry with us the wisdom gathered from countless minds across the centuries, each contribution a precious stone in the mosaic of human understanding. From the misty origins of philosophical inquiry in ancient civilizations, we have witnessed how the first stirrings of conscious reflection emerged from humanity's earliest attempts to make sense of existence. The whispered questions of our ancestors still echo through time. What is the nature of reality? What does it mean to live a good life? How can we know what we know? These eternal wonderings have flowed like a gentle river through the ages, carrying the dreams and insights of countless seekers. We have walked through the gardens of ancient wisdom, where the early philosophers of India, China, and Greece first cultivated the seeds of systematic thought. We have felt the cool shade of the olive groves where Socrates engaged his students in dialogue, teaching them not what to think, but how to think. The measured words of Plato and Aristotle have resonated across millennia, their insights about truth, justice, and the nature of reality still illuminating our modern discussions. Like watching the slow turning of seasons, we have observed how philosophical traditions grew, flourished, and transformed. The practical wisdom of the Stoics offered solace in times of turmoil. The mystical insights of Neoplatonism reached for transcendent truth. The careful logic of medieval scholars built bridges between faith and reason. Through it all, the human mind has demonstrated its remarkable capacity to probe ever deeper into the mysteries of existence. We have witnessed how philosophy adapted to changing times while maintaining its essential quest for understanding. The Renaissance renewed ancient wisdom with fresh vigor. The Enlightenment sparked new ways of thinking about knowledge, society, and human potential. The modern era brought novel questions about consciousness, language, and the nature of meaning. Yet through all these changes, the fundamental human desire to understand has remained constant, like stars that guide us through changing nights. In our journey, we have seen how philosophical ideas shaped the course of history. Political philosophies inspired revolutions and reforms. Ethical frameworks guided the development of human rights and justice. Epistemological insights drove scientific discovery and technological innovation. The thoughts conceived in quiet contemplation have moved mountains and transformed societies. As we reflect on this vast historical panorama, we can appreciate how each era faced its own challenges and questions. The ancient Greeks wrestled with the nature of change and permanence. Medieval philosophers sought to reconcile reason and faith. Enlightenment thinkers questioned traditional authority and championed human reason. Modern philosophers grappled with alienation, authenticity, and the role of technology. Yet across these diverse contexts, we find common threads of human experience: the search for meaning, the desire for truth, the hope for justice and wisdom. The story of philosophy is, in many ways, the story of human consciousness becoming aware of itself. Like a river gaining depth and breadth as it flows toward the sea, human thought has grown more nuanced and complex over time. Yet the simple wonder that first sparked philosophical inquiry remains as fresh as ever. Each generation must rediscover and reinterpret the eternal questions in light of its own experience. As we rest here in the present moment, we can feel the weight and wisdom of this philosophical heritage. The questions that troubled Plato still trouble us. The insights of Lao Tzu still illuminate paths to harmony. The moral challenges explored by Kant still shape our ethical debates. We are the inheritors of this rich tradition, and it lives through our own questioning and seeking. The great philosophers remind us that wisdom often comes not from finding final answers, but from learning to ask better questions. They teach us to embrace uncertainty while continuing to seek understanding. They show us how to hold multiple perspectives while searching for truth. These lessons are as valuable today as they were in ancient times. In our modern world of rapid change and information overload, philosophical wisdom offers a steady anchor. The measured pace of philosophical reflection provides a counterpoint to the frenetic rhythm of contemporary life. The depth of philosophical inquiry reminds us to look beneath the surface of things. The breadth of philosophical vision helps us see beyond our immediate concerns to consider larger questions of meaning and purpose. As we drift toward sleep, let us appreciate how this philosophical heritage enriches our lives in countless ways. It gives us tools for critical thinking and ethical reasoning. It provides frameworks for understanding ourselves and our place in the universe. It offers perspectives that can help us navigate personal challenges and social issues. The philosophical tradition is not just a historical artifact, but a living resource for human flourishing. Consider how the great themes of philosophical inquiry mirror the cycles of our own lives. Like the pre-Socratic philosophers, we wonder about the basic nature of reality. Like Socrates, we question our assumptions and seek self-knowledge. Like the Stoics, we strive to find peace amid life's uncertainties. Like existentialist thinkers, we grapple with questions of meaning and authenticity. The philosophical journey is, in many ways, the journey of human development writ large. As our consciousness grows quiet, we can feel our connection to this vast stream of human thought. We are part of an unbroken chain of seekers stretching back to the dawn of civilization and forward into the unknown future. Each generation adds its own insights while preserving and transmitting the wisdom of the past. In this way, philosophy remains ever ancient and ever new. The story of philosophy teaches us about the remarkable resilience of human inquiry. Through dark ages and golden ages, through revolutions and reforms, the philosophical quest has continued. It reminds us that even in troubled times, the human spirit maintains its ability to question, to wonder, to seek understanding. This persistence offers hope and inspiration for our own era's challenges. As we prepare to rest, let us take comfort in the enduring nature of philosophical wisdom. Like the steady turning of the earth, like the eternal cycle of seasons, like the constant flow of rivers to the sea, the great questions and insights of philosophy remain. They offer us perspective on our temporary troubles and connect us to the timeless aspects of human experience. In these quiet moments, we can appreciate how philosophical reflection helps us find our place in the grand sweep of time. We are both participants in and observers of the ongoing human story. Our own questions and insights join the great conversation that has continued across centuries. Our own seeking becomes part of the larger human quest for understanding. And so, as sleep approaches, we can rest in the knowledge that we are part of something larger than ourselves. The wisdom of ages surrounds us like a gentle mist. The questions that have guided human thought continue their quiet work in our dreams. The insights of countless thinkers support us like the earth beneath our feet. Let the peaceful flow of philosophical wisdom carry you toward rest. Feel your connection to the great stream of human thought and questioning. Allow yourself to float on the river of wisdom that has flowed from ancient times to the present moment. As consciousness gently fades, know that you are held in the embrace of timeless questions and eternal seeking. Like stars wheeling slowly overhead, like waves washing endlessly on distant shores, like leaves floating gently on ancient streams, the great themes of philosophical inquiry continue their eternal dance. Rest now in the quiet wisdom of ages, in the peaceful knowledge that you are part of this vast and beautiful quest for understanding. Sleep approaches like twilight softening the edges of thought, while the eternal questions watch over your dreams like distant, friendly stars.